illustrated account of Koryo, the Gaoli Tujing, Koryo Dokyong in Korean, is a unique text that deals with Koryo, that describes Koryo in the first part of the 12th century, written by Shu Jing, Sogung, and it's the only real eyewitness account of Koryo we have. Now, what is this book about? In the previous part, I explained about the background of the embassy of which the writer was part, the geopolitical background that made it imperative for the song to become better acquainted, or better friends, if you will, with the Koryo state, and the career and the life of the writer Shu Jing. Now, let's now take a better look at what the book is about, concretely. In order to fully understand the book, it is recommended to have some more background knowledge about the relationship with the Song and Jing in the 12th century. Much happened there, and the Song lost, well, half of its territory to the Jin, and that's when the book was written. This hadn't yet happened, but it was about to happen, and because this was imminent, and Song policymakers and politicians saw that this was a real possibility, the embassy was sent to Koryo in order to make sure that Koryo would choose the side of the Song, and if it didn't, and it didn't, to make sure that the Song would know as much about Koryo as it could. So it would at least know its enemy if it wouldn't gain a friend. It's not a very long book, and the most obvious thing about the Koryo Dokyong, or the illustrated account of Koryo, if you see it now in its extant version, it's called an illustrated account, but there are no illustrations. There were illustrations. It was quite clear there were portraits of, for example, famous Koryo statesmen like Kim Bu-shik and Lee Ja-gyom, but they didn't survive. We only have the text. The illustrations were apparently quite good, because when Kim Bu-shik visited the Song court in 1126, people actually recognized him from the description and from his portrait that was part of the illustrated account of Koryo. So it's still called the illustrated account of Koryo, but it's unfortunately no longer illustrated. Maybe one day in some archive or somewhere else we'll find the full version with the illustrations, but I wouldn't hold my breath. Now, why is this text so important for us, for people who want to know about Koryo? Because, quite simply because there is no other text like this for the entire Koryo period. The most important sources we use, if you write on Koryo, have been compiled, for example, in the early Joseon period, which was completely a normal thing to do. Traditionally in pre-modern East Asia, a state would bring together all the sources it had and then write a history of the state that had preceded it. In itself, that's normal state of affairs. The thing is, if you do that, of course, you are writing the history of a state that no longer exists, and it's going to be biased. And that's the unfortunate reality of Koryo sources, is that we have that biased early Joseon period version of Koryo history, for example, in the Koryo-sa, or in the history of Koryo, or the Koryo-sa Choryo, essentials of the history of Koryo, but we don't have the original documents upon which they were based. They've disappeared, they've been destroyed, or whatever happened to them, we don't know. So that's a problem. And then the other real sources, the real primary sources, because I have to admit here, let me make a confession that I also think of the Koryo-sa as a primary source, but it isn't. It's a secondary source. It was compiled in the early Joseon period. There are contemporary sources of Koryo, but they tend to be very specific. Then you're talking about inscriptions, for example, on graves or on commemorative steles. You're talking about epitaphs, so that's the kind of information often accompanied by poems about people who died. It's part of what's buried with them. There are some literary collections, but there is not very much. So really, a text like this is unique. The text itself was written in 1223 and 1224 after Shu Jing had returned home, and it was immediately submitted to the emperor himself, which tells you something about the importance that was attached to this text. A large, very large country, state like the Song, in a state like that, it's not very easy to see the emperor. It may take years before you have a chance to do so. Xu Jing went to Koryo, finished the text, draw the pictures or had those drawn, and then immediately saw the emperor. And what's also noteworthy, the version he showed the emperor was a handwritten copy. The book wasn't printed until 1167. Now there are several editions extant. But the handwritten copy with the original illustrations is unfortunately gone. Now, interestingly, the text is about Koryo, and the text would also make it to Koryo. And it may even have been taken there by a Koryo envoy who went to Song in 1126, Kim Bu-shik. He was at the head of the embassy that went there. He was recognized because when Xu Jing had been in Koryo, he had met Kim Bu-shik several times. He even says that he had met him in secret sometime, him and Kim Bu-shik and his brothers. And he had written a description of Kim Bu-shik, a flattering description, and included a picture, so he was recognized. Now, Kim Bu-shik may have taken a copy or part of a copy, we don't really know, back to Koryo. Maybe not a complete copy, again we don't know, but the only complete copy that we know of, the handwritten copy that was presented to the Song Emperor, was carried off by the Jurchen when they conquered the Song capital, or it was destroyed then, we don't know, but at least it was lost. And there was and although a different copy of the text would surface later, the illustrations would never resurface again. Now, there were interesting rumors in Qing China, so that's really much later, then we're talking about the 17th century and onwards. In Qing China, there was an interesting rumor that a Koryo edition had been prepared from the original text. So that Koryo was so interested in what the Chinese embassy envoy had to say about Koryo that a printed edition was prepared. This is probably not the case. We've never found any kind of suggestion that this was really the case, except for those rumors. If it has been prepared, it has been lost also, which could be because if you see the number of books we have from the Koryo period, it's mind-bogglingly small if you compare it to the number of books that we know that were written during that time. Now, what is this the book about? It's a very wide-ranging description of Koryo, and all kinds of different subjects are treated. But one of the important parts of the Koryo Dokyong, I can imagine, if you wanted to look at it from a political point of view, is for the Song to know what kind of politicians, what kind of leading statesmen were in charge in Koryo. And then I'm not talking about the king. Koryo kings could sometimes be powerful, sometimes they weren't, but the persons who really determined policy and who really executed policy, the persons with whom you would talk one-on-one or well, at least or in groups, and you would negotiate with, those were, of course, the highest-ranking officials and the highest-ranking aristocrats. And the Koryo Dokyong, the illustrated account of Koryo, contains a number of these portraits. And the one you see here on the screen is part of the description of Kim Bu-shik, who is described, I think, quite well. It says that many of its scions advanced in the field of letters. So it refers to the success in the state examinations of the Kim clan, of this particular Kim clan from Gyeongju. And it has to be said that Kim Bu-shik and his brothers were famous in their day, not only because they were very gifted people, but because they all had managed to pass the state examinations. About Kim Bu-shik itself, it says that he has a full complexion and a tall frame, which contrasts quite strangely with something that we'll talk about later, in which, according to Xu Jing, all Koryo people were dwarfs, really. That's the word he uses. But Kim Bu-shik has a tall frame, his face is darkly tanned, and his eyes look alert. And it's a very complimentary text. There's nobody who can match him, really, as a scholar. which echoes and reflects contemporary evaluations of Kim Bu-shik. Even if people didn't like him politically, it was hard to argue that he was not, one of the most brilliant scholars that the Koryo state has ever produced. His younger brother Pucho Kim Bu-chol is also mentioned here. He's also famous at the time. Now, this is not just a description of people, it's much more. And in that sense, and I mentioned this in the introduction, it's not a real travelogue. So it's not about the trip itself so much as about Koryo. A very factual account of Koryo was what the author was aiming at. And there are analysis of the text, not by me, but by other scholars, have shown there are examples for these kind of writings. Conversation transcripts, orok in Korean, yulu. And this is a more extended and formal version, because it was, of course, presented to the emperor, of the writings of diplomats for the consumption of the Song court. So this is basically an extra thick and extra formal run-of-the-mill diplomatic analysis and description of Koryo. And it meant to give the court the best information that Song envoys had been able to gather on Koryo. Facts: how big is the country, how many people live there, what is their religion like, how is the country governed, things like that. But also insights on who governs the country, what are the things that people find important. So all kinds of ways and avenues for politicians, and perhaps if it came to war, for generals, to come to terms with the state that was called Koryo. And of course, not being China, Koryo was not just foreign, it was barbarian. This is the Hua-I dichotomy I refer to in the introduction. So the very strong distinction between the cultured Chinese on the one hand, and the uncivilized barbarians on the other hand. And this is something which you see reflected, well, basically in every page in this book, in many other books. Now, this is not something that Koryo scholars themselves would agree with. They would recognize that they were not Chinese, but I doubt whether they would agree with the evaluation that they were less cultured. In general, the prevalent mood in Koryo society at this moment was that, and actually we have this written down on paper, so this is quite verifiable. Leading literati, leading scholars who say, well, we don't really need the relations with the Song, not diplomatic relations, political relations, because we are receiving whatever we want, we are receiving the books, and their civilization is past its prime, it's too decadent, we don't need it, we can do better. That's the Koryo gaze on Song, but the Song gaze on Koryo is a very old, very traditional way of viewing all the states surrounding China that were not China. The cultured Chinese, that's us, versus the uncivilized barbarians, and that's you. And I have some examples later about this. Let's go back for the moment, to the record itself. So it's an illustrated account, so it also had illustrations to show what the writer was talking about. So it needed to have a practical value. This is not just entertainment of the emperor. It's also not a very abstract rumination of what Koryo people are like or what the state is like. No, this was meant to be useful. And at the risk of taking this comparison too far, but perhaps this is comparable to a kind of Lonely Planet guide. You want to know that you can rely on what's written there when you go there. And that's what this basically was supposed to do. So it does contain very detailed geographical descriptions. It does contain the names of places and of gates, of institutions in Koryo and where they were situated. Now, you can imagine that given the fact that the last embassy that the Song would ever send to Koryo was the 1123 embassy, this was the last chance to gather real eyewitness information on Koryo. So the Kaoli Tujing remained important in Song because no other embassies went to Koryo in order to improve upon it or to supplement the information in it. This was it. You had to do with whatever was in the book, and everything else we don't know. And it is a well-known, it has been established that the Song did not have very much information on Koryo. So this book was important. And one of the things that the embassy was also supposed to do was to obtain books on Koryo while they were in Koryo. Now let's take a very concrete look at the book in summary. You can perhaps divide it like we've done here in 11 different parts. It starts with the author's preface, and of course the dedication to the emperor. This was not just a book, it had to be presented to the emperor. Then it talks briefly about the historical background. And then after that it immediately becomes very practical. It contains a layout of the capital city, and it's quite extensive. It describes the official system and it describes the military system. Now both, if you want to become an ally of Koryo, or if you fear that you will become an enemy, this is very useful information. Then it deals with religion, the common people and customs, then the way the embassy was received, the journey from China to Koryo, and then there's a conclusion, biography of the author, and there's a postscript. But the most important parts are in the beginning of the book. Very useful, practical information in here. Part of that information has been highlighted here in one of the extant editions of the illustrated account of Koryo. The geography of the capital has been described, like you can see here, and it's quite detailed. Like here, to the west of the Department of Ministries, south of the Spring Palace of the Crown Prince, there is a complex where the front gate stands open. Inside the gate are lined up 3 buildings. In the middle is the Royal Secretariat, and to the left is the Chancellery. This is not only detailed, this is precisely where the most important decisions in Koryo would be made. This is the place you want to be able to find, whether as a friend or as an enemy. And then it continues to the right is the Security Council, the place, in other words, where the state councillors, most important politicians and officials of Koryo, the executives of the Chancellery and Royal Secretariat and security councillors administer affairs. So, as you can see, this is not high-minded, highbrow literature. This is very practical information on something that the Song needed to know. And not just that, but also things like this, names of places, institutions and gates. A number of the names for gates of the capital of Kaesong, Kaegyong, we don't know, we wouldn't have known, I should say, if they had not been recorded in this book. And they have been recorded in this book. Not all can be confirmed from other sources, some we don't know, some are different, but generally speaking, it does help. There's a description, as I mentioned before, of famous, important persons. The kind of persons you would expect yourself or the Song state or its ambassadors to negotiate with. So you need to know who Kim Bu-sik is. You need to know who Lee Jae-gyum is. You need to know about their background. Are they aristocrats? Are they people who've taken the state examinations and are extremely gifted? In the case of Kim Bu-sik, he was both. But this is information, again, that cannot be left out from a diplomatic report like this was meant to be. Then there's more. I mean, there's this description, more general descriptions about women and men and women in Koryo. It's noted that women are very loose, and as humans, Koryoans in general lack a sense of gratitude, are sensual, are fickle in love. Now, this is the Chinese, the Sinocentric gaze that you see here. Men and women marry easily, but unions are easily dissolved. There's a very strong sense of disapproval here. So it's moral indignation, perhaps even, I don't know. This is less practical than background information. And there are descriptions also of banquets in detail. This is just part of the description. I'll not read it out. I would suggest you read the book itself. There's a very good English translation by Sam Vermeers that you can consult, and you'll find this description of a banquet, which is much longer. So there really, again, the emphasis on detail is quite conspicuous. That's why the book was written. Keywords. I don't have too many because it's really, this has all been about the Kaoli Tujing, the illustrated record of Koryo, the Koryo Dokyong. It's about the book itself. It's about the writer, Shu Jing, or Sogyung in Korean. And it's about the question whether it's a travelogue or not, and I think really it's not. It's a diplomatic report. It was supposed to be very practical. Whether Kodio would be a friend or an enemy, in both cases you would have to be able to rely on the information gathered by the song envoys while they stayed in Kodio for the short period that they did, about a month.